What happens when the one person you've been confessing everything to turns out to have been listening all along? Sky Easton has a system. She keeps her personal life personal, her professional life professional, and her very embarrassing obsession with Korean dramas completely, absolutely, 100% hidden from everyone at work. She is 27 years old. She has a career to build, and she does not need anyone in the 34th floor of Meridian Talent Agency knowing that she cries at fictional love stories on a Tuesday night. Tae Sung-bae has a system too. He smiles for cameras, performs for audiences, and keeps the real version of himself. The curious one, the quietly funny one, the one who is a little bit tired of being treated like a poster on a wall, safely locked away where no one can reach it. Then one ordinary Monday morning, Sky talks to a poster. She argues with it. She confesses things to it. And then, because the universe has a very specific sense of humor, she kisses it. And the man in the poster is standing right behind her. This is a story about two people who were both hiding, about the strange, terrifying, wonderful thing that happens when someone hears you before you're ready to be heard, about the moment you stop performing and start being real, and someone chooses you anyway. And it begins, as most great disasters do, on a Monday. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss what happens next. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been caught saying something you absolutely should not have said? Because Sky is about to understand exactly how that feels. The 34th floor of Meridian Talent Agency smelled, as it always did on Monday mornings, like fresh coffee, ambition, and the faint anxiety of people who had not yet answered all their weekend emails. The open plan office was divided between the senior agents, glass-walled offices along the east side, and the junior agents, who occupied a cluster of low-walled cubicles in the center of the floor, like a small, carpeted island of aspiration. Sky Easton arrived at 7:43 doors, which was 17 minutes before anyone else, which was exactly how she liked it. She was 27 years old, had been a junior agent at Meridian for 2 years, and had developed a very specific morning ritual that depended entirely on the office being empty. She needed the quiet. She needed the coffee. And she needed approximately 3 uninterrupted minutes with her cubicle before the rest of the world arrived. She set her bag down, turned on her monitor, and then stood in front of the small poster tacked to the left wall of her cubicle. The one she told anyone who asked was there, ironically, a gag gift from her college roommate Maya, and absolutely not something she had looked at every morning for the past 8 months. It was a promotional poster for a Korean drama called Storm and Silk, one of those sweeping on emotionally devastating period pieces that had taken the streaming world completely by storm 2 years ago, when Sky had been 25 and going through what she privately referred to as the bad semester. She'd found it on a recommendation algorithm, watched the first episode to fall asleep, and woken up at 3 a.m. having watched 7. The lead actor's name was Tae Sung-bae. He was 30 years old and had been famous in South Korea since he was 22, which meant 8 years of press junkets and award ceremonies and fan events before the American streaming platforms had found him and turned his already enormous career into something genuinely stratospheric. In the poster, he was dressed in a traditional Korean nobleman's hanbok, standing in a garden in the rain, looking at something off camera with an expression that managed to communicate deep sorrow, quiet strength, and a dignity that Sky found genuinely unreasonable. She crossed her arms and looked at it. She had a big meeting today, the biggest of her career so far. Meridian had landed a new international client, a major Korean actor making his American film debut, and her boss, Gerald Haynes, had assigned her as the junior point of contact for the logistics side. She didn't know the client's name yet. Gerald had been cagey about the details, citing NDAs and careful rollout strategy, which in Sky's experience meant either the person was extremely famous or extremely difficult, and the smart money was usually on both. She had spent the entire weekend preparing folders. She had color-coded them. She looked at the poster. The poster looked back at her. "You know," she said, because the office was empty and she was allowed. "I have been thinking about episode 9 again." And I need you to know that what happened between your character and Ji Young on that bridge was completely unnecessary. It was gratuitous emotional violence. I was not okay for 3 days. Silence. Rain on the window. The hum of the HVAC system. I know it was supposed to be tragic. I understand narrative sacrifice. But the thing is, she pointed at the poster. You looked relieved. Your character looked relieved when she left. And that means you knew. You knew she was going to leave. And you said nothing. And you just stood there in that beautiful, noble, suffering way of yours and let it happen. And that is a choice, Tae-sung. That is a character choice. And some of us found it deeply inconsiderate. She picked up her coffee cup, took a sip, set it down. I'm not angry, she said. I'm just saying there were options. She could have stayed. You could have asked her to stay. It was raining. Nobody walks away in the rain if you just ask them not to. That's basic drama law. The poster remained serene and unhelpful. Sky felt the particular loosening in her chest that she always felt during these mornings. This was the thing about talking to a poster. It couldn't judge you, couldn't repeat what you said, and had absolutely no opinions about your professional reputation. It was the perfect confidant. Okay, she said, softening. You're forgiven. You always are. That's the problem with you, honestly. You make it very hard to stay mad. She reached up, straightened the poster slightly. It had gone crooked again overnight, as it always did. And then, because she was alone, because it was Monday, because she'd had 3 glasses of wine on Saturday, and rewatched episode 9, because she was 27 and tired and a little bit soft in the places she didn't show anyone. She leaned forward and kissed it, quick and light, right at the corner of the poster where his face turned toward the rain. Good morning, she said quietly, and then a voice said, from somewhere behind her and very close, a low sound between a cough and an exhale, the kind of noise a person makes when they are trying very hard not to make any noise at all. Sky did not move for approximately 2 full seconds. Then she turned around. The man standing in the entrance to her cubicle was wearing a dark coat over a simple black shirt, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately classify, somewhere between startled and something else, something quieter, something that hadn't quite landed on a category yet. She had never seen him in person before. She had seen him in 8 episodes of a period drama, 2 magazine spreads, a fragrance advertisement that had briefly become a meme, and approximately 430 seconds of promotional content. But she recognized him immediately, the way you recognize someone you've spent months looking at, in the exact particular, stomach-dropping, time-stopping way of a person who has just been caught doing something they will never be able to explain. Tae-sung Bae was standing in her cubicle. He had just watched her kiss his poster. Sky Easton experienced what she would later describe to Maya as a full system shutdown, the kind where all available processing power redirects to a single, useless thought, which in her case was, at least I said, good morning. His manager stepped into the cubicle approximately 4 seconds after the silence became geological. The man's name was Jun-ho Park, and he appeared to be the kind of person who had spent years managing the chaos that followed his client like weather. Bye Tae-sung-si, Jun-ho said, and then something rapid in Korean, gesturing back toward the hallway. Tae-sung glanced at him, then back at Sky. Then he said something in Korean, short, measured, with a small upward inflection at the end, and Jun-ho translated with practiced efficiency. He says, good morning. He is sorry for startling you. He was told this floor was available for the walkthrough. Sky's mouth opened, then closed. The walkthrough, she repeated. Right. Yes. Yes. I wasn't told, I was told 8:30, and it is. She checked her watch with the frantic precision of a person who needed something concrete to look at. 7:47. So. Jun-ho translated. Tae-sung listened, then said something brief. He apologizes for the early arrival. His previous appointment ended ahead of schedule. Great. Perfect. That's Absolutely fine. Taesung looked at her for one more moment, and there was something in his expression that she couldn't read, something that wasn't pity and wasn't amusement and wasn't any of the things she feared. It was more like attention, careful and quiet, the look of a person who is storing something away for later. Then he turned and followed Junho back into the hallway. Sky faced her cubicle wall. She looked at the poster. "I need you to know," she said very quietly, "that this is entirely your fault." The walkthrough became a meeting at 8:30, and the meeting revealed two things Sky had not known when she walked through the door that morning. The first was the identity of Meridian's new client, which she had now confirmed with her own eyes, and which was still causing a low-grade electrical malfunction in her composure. The second was that Bae Taesung did not speak English, or at least, he appeared not to. He sat at the conference table with Junho on one side and Gerald on the other, and every question was routed through the interpreter with a patience that suggested this was simply how things worked, how they had always worked, how they would continue to work throughout the entire engagement. Sky sat 2 seats down from Junho and took notes. She was good at this. She was good at being competent and invisible simultaneously. It was a skill she had developed as the youngest person in every room she'd ever worked in. She asked her questions at the right moments, kept her language clear and direct, and did not once look at the poster she had kissed 40 minutes ago. She was profoundly committed to not thinking about it. Taesung, for his part, was, she noted with the detached professionalism she was actively constructing in real time, very good at being in a meeting. He listened to translations with full attention. He asked questions that were precise and practical, about the filming schedule, about the arrangements for his team, about the protocols for press during production. He did not perform charm. He was not working the room. This surprised her. She had expected the version she'd seen in magazine spreads, polished, composed, offering calculated warmth. What she got instead was someone considerably more direct, someone who seemed, underneath the careful quiet, to be genuinely paying attention. At one point, Gerald made a joke that wasn't particularly funny, and everyone at the table produced the appropriate social laughter. Taesung waited for Junho to translate, listened, and then, instead of laughing, simply looked at Gerald with an expression of mild, polite confusion, as if the joke had been translated correctly and was no more humorous in Korean. Sky pressed her pen to her notepad to keep from smiling. After the meeting, Gerald pulled her aside. "Though I'm reassigning Bae's day-to-day coordination to you," he said, with the energy of someone delivering good news to a person he was mildly inconveniencing. "Marcus is swamped with the Haverford contract. You'll be the point of contact for logistics, scheduling, and any on-site needs during filming. Junho speaks excellent English. It shouldn't be complicated." Sky looked at him. "You'll do great," Gerald said, and walked away. In the hallway, on her way back to her cubicle, she passed Taesung and Junho heading toward the elevator. Taesung glanced at her. Then, without Junho translating anything, he gave a small, careful nod, the kind that meant something without requiring language, and looked away. Sky kept walking. She sat down at her desk, opened a new document, and titled it Bae Tae-sung, Coordination File. She stared at the poster. The poster offered nothing. She typed. The first week was professional. Sky coordinated with Junho on the schedule, sent confirmation emails about the film locations in Midtown, arranged security protocols with the building management, and communicated exactly nothing to Taesung directly because there was no need to. Everything went through the interpreter, which was clean and correct, and kept approximately 30 feet of comfortable distance between her and the worst moment of her adult life. The second week was when things started going sideways. It started on a Tuesday, when Junho called to say he had a family emergency in Seoul and would be back in 4 days. In the meantime, his assistant, a 23-year-old named Daewon, would handle any translation needs. But Daewon had a scheduling conflict on Wednesday afternoon, which meant that the scheduled location review at the film site, the one Sky had arranged and confirmed and color-coded in 3 separate calendars, would need to happen with just Sky and Tae-sung. Sky stared at her phone for a long moment after the call ended. Then she went to her desk, looked at the poster, and said, "I am handling this with complete professionalism." The poster seemed unconvinced. They met at the location, a restored warehouse space in Brooklyn that the production had rented for a key interior sequence, at 2 p.m. Tae-sung arrived with 2 members of his security team and a very small notebook that he was writing in when she walked up. He looked up when he heard her. "Well, hello," she said, because that at least required no translation. "Hello," he said back, and then stopped, and looked at the building. Sky waited to see if more was coming. It wasn't. She pulled out her own folder, physical, color-coded, because she was who she was, and walked him through the space. She had a rough translation app on her phone for emergencies, but what she discovered within the first 10 minutes was that the tour didn't particularly require language. She pointed at things. She gestured at ceiling heights, at the light coming through the industrial windows, at the sight lines from the planned camera positions. He looked where she pointed, and nodded or tilted his head in the way that meant a question was forming. At one point, she pointed to a corner of the space and drew a rough floor plan sketch on the back of one of her pages to show how the set design would divide the room. He looked at it, then held out his hand for the pen. She gave it to him. He made one adjustment to the sketch, moved a line, added an angle, and handed it back with a look that said, "Like this, maybe." She looked at the adjustment. It was a better angle. It opened the sight line in a way her original hadn't accounted for. "Huh," she said. He looked at her. "That's actually better," she said, and he obviously didn't understand the words. But she nodded at the sketch in a way that conveyed agreement, and something small and almost imperceptible shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. They spent 90 minutes in the space. By the end, she had 3 pages of notes and an adjustment request for the production designer. He had filled 6 pages of his small notebook with sketches and observations she couldn't read. Outside, waiting for their respective cars, she stood in the late afternoon light and looked at her phone. The translation app was still open. She typed, "Thank you for your notes. The angle adjustment was a good idea." She held the phone out. He read it, then looked at her. Just briefly, just for a second, with something that was more than politeness. He took the phone from her hand, typed carefully, and gave it back. The translation read, "You are very organized. The folders are a lot." She stared at the screen. Then she looked up at him, and he was looking at the street with a completely neutral expression, and she thought, for just a moment, that she might have imagined the extremely dry humor that had just occurred. She typed, "The folders are the correct amount of folders." He read it, and this time, undeniably, briefly, and with what appeared to be genuine reluctance, he smiled. The problem with getting comfortable was that it happened gradually, and then all at once. Junho came back from Seoul. The translator system resumed. Everything returned to the careful, buffered professional arrangement that had existed before. But something had shifted in the space between them. A small recalibration. The kind that happened when 2 people had spent 90 minutes working on something real, without the insulation of formality. Tae-sung started appearing at the 34th floor more often than was strictly necessary. He had meetings with Gerald about the film's promotional strategy. He had calls with the production team that ran through Meridian's conference rooms. These were all legitimate reasons to be in the building, and Sky did not examine them too closely. What she did not account for was that the conference rooms were on the same hallway as the junior agents' cubicles, and that a person moving through that hallway would, naturally, pass her workspace, and that she talked to herself when she was working. Not out loud, exactly, more like a low-level murmur, the audible edge of her thought process. She had done it her entire life. Her mother called it narrating. Her college roommate had found it charming for about 6 months and then bought earplugs. She did not think about it until Wednesday of the 3rd week. She was at her desk, wrestling with a contract clause that kept folding back on itself in a way that made no legal sense. And she was saying, mostly to her monitor, "No, see, if the exclusivity window closes on the 15th, then the promotional clause can't activate until the 17th, which means there are 2 days of open territory, and someone clearly did not check the calendar. And I would like to speak to that person." She became aware of a presence at the edge of her cubicle. Tae-sung was standing there with his notebook and a coffee cup from the machine down the hall, watching her with the same expression she had started to recognize as his default when something interested him. Calm, contained, and paying very close attention. She stopped. He gave the small nod that by now she understood meant something like hello, or I acknowledge you, or I'm not here to interrupt. She gestured at the monitor. Contract. Problem. He looked at the monitor, then back at her. Reached into his notebook and wrote something, tore out the page, and held it out. She took it. In neat, careful English. The kind of English that belonged to someone who had learned to write it more carefully than they spoke it. It read, "You talk to yourself when you work. It seems to help." Sky looked at the paper, then at him. He had already turned to walk away. "Wait, you write English?" she called after him. He paused, glanced back, and held up his hand in a gesture that meant, a little, then continued down the hallway. She looked at the paper again, then back at her poster. "He writes English," she told it. The poster was unhelpfully serene. "This is going to be a problem," she said. The translation app had become a regular tool, not constant, not every interaction, but present enough that a certain rhythm developed between them in the hallways and conference rooms of Meridian. He would write notes in English when he had something to say directly to her. She would type into the app when she needed more than a gesture could carry. She was careful. She was professional. She was 27 years old and had a career to build, and she was absolutely not developing feelings for a client. Then, at the end of the 2nd week, he asked her to show him the city. It came through Junho, formally and correctly. Tae-sung had a rare free Saturday and wanted to see New York as a civilian rather than as a client. No press, no cameras, small security presence. Junho had asked Sky because she knew the city, and because she had the clearance, and because Gerald had designated her as the point of contact. She said yes, before she had fully thought about it. They met at 9 in the morning outside the building. He was dressed in a way that was clearly designed to avoid attention. Cap pulled low, simple jacket, nothing that read as deliberate. She had dressed the same way by accident, which she chose not to examine. She took him to the places she actually loved, which were not the places on any tourist list. The bakery in the West Village that had been run by the same family since 1987. The tiny bookshop in the East Village that organized its shelves by emotion rather than genre. The park bench in Riverside Park where you could see the Hudson and, on a clear day, feel briefly like the city had exhaled. They communicated in their assembled shorthand, her phone, his notebook, gestures, the occasional shared look at something that needed no translation. He took notes constantly, not about the places, she realized after a while, but about small things. The way a kid on a bicycle navigated a crowd, the specific quality of light on the river, a conversation she'd had with the bakery owner that he'd watched with close, quiet attention. At the bookshop, she watched him move through the shelves slowly, reading the category labels the owner had created. She had memorized them. Things that happened too fast. Missing someone you haven't met. Rain that means something. She watched him stop at that one. She pulled out her phone and typed, "The owner says every story worth telling has weather in it that means something." He read it, then wrote in his notebook and turned it to face her. Like the bridge in episode 9. She stared at the words. Her brain performed a very swift calculation, arrived at a conclusion, and then quietly refused to process it fully. "You know Storm and Silk," she said out loud. Which was obvious, since it was his show. But that wasn't what she meant, and something in her voice must have conveyed that. Because he looked at her with that careful attention again. That look that felt, increasingly, like being properly seen. He wrote, "I know what people feel when they watch it. Sometimes that is different from what I did when I made it." She read it twice. She stopped. Started again. That's a lot more self-aware than I expected." He tilted his head. Translation. She typed it in. He read the translation. Then, after a moment, the reluctant smile, the one she had filed away after the Brooklyn afternoon and had been trying not to think about since. They walked back along the river as the afternoon went golden. She didn't think about the poster. She thought about the bookshop shelf. Rain that means something. She thought about how she hadn't been this honest about what she cared about in a very long time. Not because she'd been lying, but because no one had been paying close enough attention to make it necessary. She should have noticed sooner. Looking back later, she would identify at least 4 moments in the 2 weeks following the Saturday in the city where the evidence was there, visible and clear, and she had simply not assembled it. Moment 1. She had mentioned, in passing, during a logistics call with Junho, that the catering company had made an error with the dietary requirements. She'd said the words salmon and Thursday in the same sentence. The next Thursday, Tae-sung's lunch order from the production catering had been quietly corrected. Moment 2. She had been talking to herself at her desk, narrating the contents of a vendor email, and said, with some feeling, that the phrase best efforts in a contract was not a timeline. 3 days later, in a meeting where the same vendor was present, Junho had made exactly that argument. In a meeting Tae-sung had attended. Moment 3, she had, in a moment of complete cubicle isolation comfort, sang 11 seconds of a song from the Storm and Silk soundtrack under her breath while formatting a spreadsheet. She became aware of the presence at the edge of her cubicle only after she had finished the phrase. Tae-sung was holding 2 cups of coffee from the machine and looking at the wall with the very specific expression of a man who was working very hard at something. Moment 4. She had told the poster, one early morning, about the Saturday by the river. Had said, quietly and honestly, that she had not expected him to be like this. That she had expected someone who lived inside an image and was surprised to find a person. She had said, "It's confusing when someone turns out to be more than you prepared for." She had been talking to a poster. She had not looked behind her. She had become comfortable. It was Thursday of the 4th week when it broke open. She was in the small kitchen off the conference room, making tea, and Tae-sung was there too, doing something with the coffee machine. They were alone. Junho was in a call. The floor was quiet. And she was doing the thing she always did when she needed to think. Murmuring. She was working through a scheduling conflict in her head. She said, essentially to the kettle, "The problem is, if we move the Tuesday call to Thursday, that bumps the location confirmation, which means I have to call Marcus. And Marcus is wonderful. Marcus is a colleague I respect. But Marcus has the organizational instincts of a golden retriever. And if I don't walk him through every step..." She heard a sound that was, definitively and unmistakably, a suppressed laugh. She turned. Tae-sung had his back to her, ostensibly occupied with the coffee machine. His shoulders had a quality she had not seen before. An alertness, a tension, the precise posture of a person who has laughed without meaning to and is now attempting to re-establish innocence. She set down her mug. "You laughed," she said. He turned. His expression was entirely, masterfully composed. "That was a laugh," she said, "at something I said, in English." A pause, very brief. The kind of pause that, in retrospect, was its own confession. He held up his hand in the little gesture, but this time, standing in the quiet kitchen with the evidence arranged in front of her, Sky did not let it pass. "How much," she said slowly, "is a little?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, in English that was clear and steady, and not remotely halting, "More than a little." She left the kitchen, not dramatically. She didn't storm out, didn't raise her voice. She just said, with a very controlled calmness that she would later recognize as the outermost layer of a very deep reaction, "I see. Excuse me," and walked back to her desk. She sat down. She looked at her monitor. She looked at the poster. She thought about every single thing she had said in this building in the last 4 weeks. The narrating, the contract monologue, the 11 seconds of the Storm and Silk soundtrack, the things she'd said to the poster, every morning, alone, because she thought she was alone. And then a particular morning snagged in her memory, and she felt it pull, and she thought, the morning in the bookshop, rain that means something. He had quoted her back to herself, and she hadn't understood what she was seeing. And the poster. The very first morning. He had been there. He had heard everything. The argument about episode 9, the bridge, the rain, the character choices, the 3 days she hadn't been okay. And then the part at the end, the quick and impulsive and undefended part where she had kissed the corner of the poster and said good morning. He had heard that. He had been in her building for 4 weeks, knowing exactly what she thought about his show, what she felt about his character, what she did when she thought no one was watching, and he had said nothing. He had sat through meetings. He had taken coffee from the machine on her floor. He had walked through her hallway. He had smiled at her, not unkindly, not cruelly, but with that quiet attention that she had interpreted as simply how he was, while carrying the full knowledge of who she was when she forgot to perform. She felt something complicated move through her. Embarrassment, yes, that was the surface layer, hot and immediate. But underneath it was something that landed harder, something with weight. She had trusted the empty office. She had trusted the privacy of her own cubicle, her own habits, her own honest voice in a space she believed was contained. And that trust had been, for 4 weeks, quietly not honored. He came to find her 20 minutes later. She was staring at a document she hadn't processed a word of. Sky. Her name, in his voice, with the particular careful shape of someone speaking a word they have been thinking about for a while. She looked up. He was standing at the entrance to her cubicle, the same place he had been standing that very first morning, and his expression had dropped all its composure. He looked like someone who had done a calculation and arrived at an answer he hadn't fully planned for. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You do," she said. "I know that I handled this poorly." "Yes?" He looked at her, then at the poster, then back at her, with something that was almost its own apology before he'd said a word. "Can I explain?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You have." She checked her watch. 17 minutes before my next call. So, yes. Explain. He sat down in the spare chair, the one that lived in the corner of her cubicle and generally held her coat, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and she noticed that without the managed stillness he usually occupied, he seemed like a different person, smaller, in the way that was actually larger, more present. "I learned English when I was 12, he said. "My father was a film director. He believed that understanding the language of American cinema was professional equipment. So I studied it. I was fluent by 16. I have been fluent for 14 years. He paused. "When I do international work, I use an interpreter. This is not deception. It is professional strategy. An interpreter slows conversations down. It gives me time to think before I respond. In negotiations, in press, in situations where words matter, the buffer protects me, Sky was listening. When I came to Meridian, he continued, I had already agreed with Junho that we would use the standard protocol. And then I was early on the first morning, and I came to the 34th floor before anyone was there. And I was looking for the conference room when I heard someone. He stopped. Started again more carefully. Talking. A pause. And I heard you, he said, before I saw you. And by the time I understood what I was hearing, I was already there, in the cubicle, and it was too late to leave without me knowing you'd been there, she said. Yes. He met her eyes. And so I said nothing, and then I did the wrong thing, which was to continue saying nothing, when I should have told you after the meeting, after the first week, before any of this went any further. Sky was quiet. Why didn't you? She asked. Tell me. He looked at the poster for a moment. Just for a moment. Then back at her. Because I haven't talked to someone like that in a very long time, he said. Someone who wasn't talking to me. Someone who was just honest in a room she thought was empty. The honest weight of that sat between them. You were angry at my character, he said, and there was the smallest trace of the reluctant smile. About the bridge. About the rain. You said he should have asked her to stay. He should have, Sky said. Automatically. Defensively. I know, he said quietly. I thought so too. I told the director. He disagreed. She stared at him. The director wanted the ending to be about loss, Taesung said. I thought it should be about fear. About a man who didn't know how to ask for what he wanted and was too proud to try. The director was more interested in aesthetics than psychology. A pause. You saw what I was trying to play. She was very still. Nobody has ever said that to me, he said. Not in any interview. Not in any review. Not in 8 years of people talking about that show. You said it to a poster at 7:45 in the morning because you thought you were alone, and it was... He stopped. Looked at his hands briefly. And it was the first time in a long time that I felt like something I did was actually seen. The sound of the building settled around them, phones ringing somewhere down the hall, the elevator. That doesn't make it okay, Sky said finally. Her voice was steady, but the emotion underneath it was something she'd have to sort out later, in private, when she was alone with the poster and the honest part of herself. You should have told me. I know, he said. I'm sorry. You heard me be embarrassing for 4 weeks. You were never embarrassing, he said. And the way he said it, not quickly, not diplomatically, but with the weight of someone who meant exactly what the words contained, made it land differently than any reassurance she'd expected. She looked at him for a long moment. I need, she said slowly, to think about this. He nodded. Stood. Took his notebook from his coat pocket, and then, instead of leaving, he set it on her desk, open to a page near the middle. She looked down. It was the sketch he'd drawn during the location review. The warehouse space, the adjusted sightline, the angle that had been better than hers. But he had continued working on it afterward. The page was full now, a drawing of the space as it might look during filming, with light and shadow and a detail she hadn't noticed until now. In the corner of the sketch, where the camera position would be, there was a figure. Small, just lines, just a suggestion of a person, standing very straight, holding what was clearly a folder. She looked up. He was already at the end of the hallway. He didn't look back. She thought about it for 3 days. She talked to Maya, who was a kindergarten teacher in Philadelphia, and had the perspective of someone who spent her days mediating disputes between 5-year-olds, and therefore found adult conflict both easy to decode and faintly comic. Maya said, He hid a secret because talking to you felt real. That's not nothing, Sky. That's actually kind of the whole point. She talked to the poster. She told him, in the strange, comfortable habit that she would now never be able to fully unsee, that she was trying to be angry about the right things and not the wrong ones, that she was trying to separate embarrassment from actual harm, that she was aware the embarrassment was very loud and was attempting to listen for what was underneath it. She thought about what he had said. The first time in a long time that I felt like something I did was actually seen. She thought about that a lot. She knew something about performing. She knew something about the gap between what you showed people at work and what happened when you thought no one was watching. She had built a careful, competent, professional exterior around the version of herself that watched K-dramas at 2 a.m, with feelings too big to explain. She had a poster on her cubicle wall that she talked to every morning and told no one about. She had thought she was keeping herself safe. She hadn't considered that someone else might be doing the same thing, that behind the stillness and the managed presence, there was a person who had spent 8 years being looked at without being seen, and who had heard her, in an empty room, say the thing that no reviewer had said, and had held on to it because it was real. On the 4th morning, she came in at 7:43. The floor was empty. She stood in front of the poster. "Okay," she said. "I figured it out." She reached up. Carefully, slowly, she unpinned the poster from the wall, folded it with a certain reverence, the reverence you give to the thing that carried you through a hard year, even when the carrying is done. Set it in the corner of her desk. Then she sat down and typed an email. It was short. It said, "I'd like to talk. Not through Junho. Not through the app. If you're available this week, let me know when..." She sent it to the email address Junho had listed as Taesung's direct line, which she had never used. The reply came 40 minutes later. It was also short. It said, "I'm available now. I'm in the lobby." She stared at this for a moment. Then she picked up her phone, her keycard, and, after a brief pause, the folded poster, and went to the elevator. He was in the lobby, sitting on one of the low benches near the window. He looked up when she came out of the elevator and stood, and in that moment, before either of them had said a word, she had the particular, disorienting experience of seeing the same face in 2 different versions of herself. The one who had looked at a poster for 8 months, and the one standing in a lobby in March with a folded piece of paper under her arm. The lobby version was better, more complicated, more real. "You're early," she said. "And I was already here," he said. "I wanted to be in the building in case you were available." She looked at him for a moment. "That's very organized of you," she said. The reluctant smile, full and unguarded in a way she had only seen it once before, at the bookshop. "I learned from someone." They sat down on the bench. The lobby moved around them. Security desk, the revolving door, the occasional arrival of people in early for meetings. They were unremarkable. Nobody looked. "I'm not angry," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I was. The embarrassment is its own thing, and I'm still processing that, and it's going to come up again, probably at a bad moment, and I want to warn you now." He nodded seriously, as if this were a perfectly reasonable clause in an agreement. "But I understand why you didn't say anything," she said. "I don't think it was malicious. I think it was..." She searched for the word. "Afraid. I think you were afraid that if you broke the moment, the real version of me would disappear, and I would go back to being the professional one who doesn't talk to posters." He was very quiet. "And I get that," she said, "because I have been doing the same thing in reverse. I've been performing competence at you for 4 weeks, because I was terrified you already knew too much, and I was trying to balance the scales by being as impressively functional as possible." He said, "The color-coded folders. We're defensive," she confirmed. "I know," he said. "I thought they were wonderful." She looked at him. "They were..." What is the word? He thought for a second. Sincere. In the way that something is sincere when the person making it is trying very hard. I find that he seemed to run out of English for a moment. He reached into his coat. The notebook was always in the coat, and wrote something and held it out. It read, "I find sincerity and effort very difficult to resist." She read it twice. Then she held out the folded poster. He looked at it, then at her. "It felt strange to keep it up," she said. "And now that you're—" She gestured vaguely at him, at the lobby, at the general situation. An actual person, instead of a wall decoration. It seemed like a boundary issue. He took the poster carefully, looked at it, then, very precisely, he folded back the edge of his notebook cover and slid the poster inside, flat against the back. "Okay," she said. She wasn't sure what she meant by it, but it felt true. "Okay." "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask me things, in English, directly. Going forward, that is going to be how this works." Something in his expression eased, not dramatically, but in the way that a person eases when they are no longer calculating how to hold themselves. "The Saturday," he said, "by the river. When you talked about the bookshelf. The missing someone you haven't met. I remember. Is that something you were missing?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about things when she thought no one was listening. Then she said, "I think I had been missing the version of someone who already understood things about me that I hadn't said, which seems impossible, which is probably why I put it in a category called fiction." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have spent 8 years watching my own face on walls. I stopped seeing it a long time ago, but I came into this building early on a Monday morning, and I heard someone argue with me about the bridge in episode 9, and—" He stopped. "And," she said. "And for the first time in a very long time," he said, "I wanted to stay in the conversation." The revolving door turned. Someone came in. The building went on around them in its ordinary morning way, and Skye sat with the weight of what had just been said. The sincerity in it, the careful and effortful sincerity. And she thought about a man in a rainy garden on a bridge who didn't ask her to stay, and about a different man, in a lobby in March, who had been trying in his imperfect way to say exactly that since the beginning. "The promotional event," she said. "For the film. I'm coordinating it. It's in 6 weeks." "I know," he said. "I thought," she considered the word, "after that, when the professional relationship has a different shape, I thought maybe we could have a conversation, an actual one, no interpreter, no notebook, no apps, just talking." He looked at her with the full, unguarded version of the expression she had been seeing in pieces for weeks. All its components assembled at once, nothing held back. "I thought," he said carefully, "we already were." She looked at him. "Fair point," she said. He smiled. Not the reluctant one, not the careful one, the real one, the one she suspected very few people had seen, wide enough to change his whole face. She thought about the poster on the cubicle wall, about the way she had talked to it every morning for 8 months, honest in the way she could only be when she was certain no one was listening. She thought about what it meant that the person who had heard all of it had not run, had not used it, had held it carefully in a notebook between sketches of warehouses and adjusted sightlines. She thought about the shelf in the bookshop. Missing someone you haven't met. "Okay," she said. We were. I'm catching up." "Take your time," he said, and then quietly, "I'll be here." The promotional event for Into the Deep, the film that had brought Tai-Sung Bay to New York, to Meridian, to the 34th floor, to the Monday morning that would eventually become the story Skye told whenever someone asked how they had met, went well. It went very well, actually. because Sky had organized it with 3 color-coded folders and a contingency file that her colleagues would later refer to as excessive, and she would refer to as correct. Tae-sung attended the event as the lead actor of a major American production, composed and still and very good at his job. He said everything that needed to be said to every person who needed to hear it. He smiled for cameras with the measured, controlled grace of 8 years of practice. And once, in the 45 minutes between the formal press portion and the industry reception, he appeared at Sky's elbow in a side corridor where she was rerouting a logistics problem on her phone, and he said, quietly and in plain English, "Your folder system for tonight is only 2 colors. Is everything okay?" She looked up. He was looking at her with the particular attention that by now she recognized as his version of, "Are you all right?" Attentive, specific, not performative. "I streamlined," she said. "I'm evolving." "Terrifying," he said. "Go back to your event." "I came to find you first." She looked at him. He looked at her. The noise of the reception filtered through the corridor walls, and she was 27 years old in a hallway with a person who had found her. Not the professional, competent, color-coded version, but the one who argued with posters at 7:45 in the morning and had come back to find her specifically. "You have approximately 3 minutes before Gerald notices you're gone," she said. "I know," he said. And then, unhurriedly, with the same careful sincerity she had come to understand was simply how he operated. "After this is over, the film, the press cycle, the professional relationship. What about it?" "I want to see the bookshop again," he said. "The one organized by emotion. I have questions about some of the categories." She looked at him. "I have thoughts," he added, "about where things should be shelved. For example, I believe Storm and Silk belongs under Rain that means something, and your colleagues at this agency belong under Missing Something You Never Had, which I recognize is harsh." She laughed. Actually laughed, which she hadn't planned on. He looked at her laughing with an expression of simple, unguarded warmth, the kind that didn't calculate its own effect because it wasn't trying to. "Saturday," she said. "Bookshop. 10 in the morning." "I will be on time," he said. "You will be early," she said. "You are always early." "I will be early," he agreed. He turned to go back, paused. "Sky." Tae-sung. He said something in Korean, low and quick, not for anyone else. She had been using the translation app less. She had been learning, slowly, on her own, the way you learn a thing when you are paying close attention to someone who speaks it. She caught enough. "I know," she said quietly. He went back to his event. She went back to her phone and her rerouted logistics and the 2-color folder system she was genuinely evolving. In her cubicle, the wall where the poster had been was empty. She had ordered something to fill it, a small print of a river she had photographed that Saturday in March. The Hudson going silver in the afternoon, the city behind her reflected in it. It would arrive Thursday. In his notebook, between sketches and observations, and 6 pages of careful, quiet attention, a poster was folded flat. A man in rain, in a garden, looking at something off camera. He had figured out, eventually, what the character was looking at. He thought she already knew. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me your favorite moment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. New stories every week. See you in the next one.